How many of you are familiar with that? Okay, that's a good show of hands. That is the most rigorous and ambitious green building standard on the planet, and it comes right out of the Pacific Northwest. So we advocate and love this project, and we encourage you to bring it into your own communities. And in fact, we've got 15 branches across this bioregion that is talking about living building challenge, that's doing build small, live large advocacy in their communities and neighborhoods, that's transforming policy wherever they're at, and we encourage you to join us. Join this network. It's a really powerful membership, and we put your dollars right back into your community. So that's how we make effective policy transformation. We do groundbreaking policy work, like I said, with net zero water, life cycle analysis in buildings. We streamline codes to help jurisdictions get into this advanced age. This is where we're at, and Cascadia Green Building Council plays a huge role in that. So we're so fortunate to be partnering with a progressive bureaucracy like Metro and DEQ. We're very fortunate to be living in this area. And for those of you who have never been to Living Future, can I show a quick show of hands of who has been to Living Future? Okay, seek these people out and ask them what they think. This is the Unconference. It's taking place in Seattle in May 2013, Living the Future. It's resilience and regeneration. This is the best. I don't even mess around with Greenbuild. I don't mess around with any other these conferences. I mean, I say that now because I work for this organization. But it's the best of the best, so I encourage you to go. So today is a summit like we've never seen before, and we're very excited that you're here. It's a packed house. We love it. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So we're going to showcase what's already possible and what development opportunities have yet to be tapped. So I think that's part of the reason that you're here. Today is where demographic shift meets urban scale development, and it's where visionaries get down to business. So I have a question for you. Are you ready? Yeah. Are you ready? Yeah. That momentum wasn't really going anywhere, but it's good that you got it. So I want to cover a few logistics. All of the sessions today are approved for 8 hours of GBCI credit and AIA credit. And if you're a AICP, it's all self-reporting. So and when you go to each session, there's a sign-in sheet, and you will not get credit unless you sign in. So for this main session this morning after Ross speaks, you can sign in up front. And in each one of the rooms, there will be a session sheet up front, and the moderators will be able to handle it for you. You'll get a reminder about this at each session. Clear? Okay. The bathrooms are located on this floor and the floor below us. The women's is behind us, and the men's is back here. And there are 2 breakout rooms in addition to this room. So this is the ballroom. This is where there are AM and PM sessions going on. And the Vanport room is located directly behind you here. And the ADU room is on the same hallway, but all the way at the end of that wing. So every session is happening on this floor. You don't need to get back here. Don't get confused unless you're a lady looking for the restroom. So, and if you stick around this afternoon, we've got an amazing slam for you with 7 of the Pacific Northwest's brightest and hippest designer contractors, and I really hope you stick around for that. We're opening the session. It's free for the public. It's at 3 o'clock today, so you're going to see some really kick-ass projects, and we want you to stick around for that. So much so that we also have a brewer from Hood River, Free Family Brewing, that's coming in. He's a Belgian-style brewer at 4:30, so you will get to partake in that as well. Sounds pretty good. We know. So I want to just quickly introduce our sponsors for the day. This summit could not happen without the support of, obviously, the Cascadia Green Building Council and Metro, but also the Department of Environmental Quality, Hammer in Hand, and the Energy Trust, as well as Living Room Realtors. Big round of applause for these sponsors. Thank you so much. All right, the last comment I wanted to say was this summit was not put together by very few. It was put together by a handful of people. And this space-efficient housing work group has been busy for the last 10 months building these sessions, building the concept, building who's going to be the partners in this. So thank you so much to those hardworking individuals, many of you who are here today. In fact, raise your hand if you were involved in that planning process. So, okay. Thank you. Okay, and last but not least, yeah, this is last, but not least. I'm about to introduce the spearhead behind this whole project, Jordan Palmieri. He is the man. And this would have not happened without him. And I'll just introduce Jordan real quick. But he is the environmental scientist in the Green Building Program at the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. He has worked for federal and state governments for the past 9 years on forestry, water quality, site cleanup, and green building topics. Now, his current efforts are on reducing life cycle environmental impacts of building material consumption, which is what we're going to talk about today. He's worked on building code, rating systems, material modeling, and local incentive structures to place the value on size on par with other green building practices. So this is the guy who is really the reason why we're here today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jordan Palmieri.
Hi there. So thanks for that introduction, Nick. And thank you, Cascadia, for helping us pull off such a great event. It's really good to see so many familiar faces in the audience, because really this was a group effort in every sense of the word. And it's also good to see so many new faces. There's almost 300 of you out there, so thanks for spending your day with us today. So I'm going to start off by showing you something that we all know already. Smaller homes use fewer materials, they use less energy, and they cause less greenhouse gas emissions over the life of the home. But what we wanted to know at Oregon DEQ was, how do the benefits of reducing home size compare to other green building practices? So we took a look at a 2,200 square foot home built to code, 2010 code, and then said, let's try a few other things. We looked at staggered stud framing, double wall construction, more insulation, and these practices did reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We then looked at an Energy Star home. Better insulation, better windows, better air tightness, better heating equipment, and again, greenhouse gas emissions were reduced for this home. However, simply building a 1,600 square foot home to code reduced greenhouse gas emissions even further than that 2,200 square foot Energy Star home. So the point here is that size is really effective at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, it was the most effective practice that we looked at in our study. Now, I don't want to discount the benefits of energy efficiency at all, because it's really quite important. In this chart, we'll see the annual energy use of 5 different size homes. And for each of these homes, there's 3 different levels of efficiency. The blue is the 2010 code, green is Energy Star, and red is advanced performance, which is about 40% better than code. You'll notice that in any given size category, efficiency matters. It matters a lot. You're able to reduce annual energy use. But when you start looking across the size categories, you see that size is really effective at reducing energy use as well. Now, there's been a lot of work, great work going on in the residential and commercial green building fields, and a lot of it focuses on energy efficiency, and rightfully so, because it matters. But size matters too, and that's why all of you are here today, and that's why DEQ and many others have been working on trying to put the environmental benefits of building small on par with all of the other green building practices that are available to folks out there. So despite the benefits of small homes, house size has really increased over time. Over the last 60 years, we've seen house size jump from about 1,000 square feet in 1950 to about 2,500 square feet in 2005. At the same time, we're putting fewer and fewer people in our homes. And so what Build Small, Live Large is about today is it's about providing alternatives to that large single-family home. And it's not about multifamily, and I want to be clear about that. And it's not about multifamily for 2 reasons. Number one, multifamily is already small. The average new multifamily unit is about half the size of a single-family unit. And also, people really like single-family homes, and they demand them. They want their yard, and they want their own 4 walls. But despite the fact that people do want their own 4 walls, many of these people are just living in 1- and 2-person households. So here's data from 1960 in the state of Oregon. We're going to cycle through a few years. What I want to point out is that the 1- and 2-person households make up about 47% of all the households in 1960. Pay attention to the blue and the red as we go through over time. Here's 1960, 1970, 80, 90, 2000, and then finally 2010, where 1 and 2 person households now make up about 63% of all households in Oregon. So the question is does our housing stock actually match our demographic demand? Well, that's the exact question the city of Milwaukee, Oregon asked when they were revising their residential zoning codes earlier this year. And they looked at demographic stats and said, well, here's what our community looks like here in Milwaukee. And it was a similar trend. About 70% of all households were 1 and 2 person households. And because of that, they said, well, let's revise our zoning code for accessory dwelling units, and let's put more pocket neighborhoods and cottage clusters in the zoning code. So that's happening right now in Milwaukee. The last demographic trend I'll touch on is the 65 and older population. Over the next 20 years, this population is going to double in the country. 65 and older seniors, they either want to age in place, they want to be close to their community, friends, family, transit services, healthcare. This in and of itself is going to be a huge market driver for small housing. So let's talk about some of the work that we've done over the last year or so. And it turns out that I'm not the only person interested in these issues. Like Nick referred to, we have a space-efficient housing group. Many of the members, some of them aren't listed on this slide, but we've been meeting for a while now to talk about how to increase both the supply and the demand of what we term space-efficient housing. And individually and collectively, this group has made some great successes, and many of which you'll hear about in today's session. The first one I'll highlight is the REACH building code. We got size-based tiers incorporated into the REACH building code for Oregon, which now requires larger homes to be more energy efficient. The REACH code is an optional building code in Oregon that will essentially serve as kind of a buffet of options next time the residential mandatory code comes up for its cycle. And if adopted into mandatory code, Oregon would join the state of Washington as one of the few states in the nation that would require more energy efficiency for larger homes. Worked with Earth Advantage to revise their rating system to allow more points being awarded to smaller homes because they were undervalued previously. Started a website a number of folks in this room did and contributed to, accessorydwellings.org. Please visit it, share your story, check it out. It's growing into a one-stop shop for all things ADU. This month, Taylor Watkins and Martin Brown are publishing a new appraisal methodology in the Journal of Appraisal. They're going to be featuring this in one of the sessions today. It has a lot of promise for how to appraise and value and get easier financing for accessory dwelling units. This year's Pedalpalooza tours in Portland were a huge success. Linda Menard, Eli Spivak, among many others, helped organize these tours. There was a tiny homes tour that drew over 120 participants. And there was an accessory dwelling unit tour that also drew over 120 participants. So people are interested in this issue. Cole Peterson, an ADU homeowner and advocate, lives in Northeast Portland, blogged extensively about his experience in building an ADU in his backyard. Through the process, he realized that there was a real lack of information and education for homeowners. And really, for ADUs, in some cases, homeowners have to become these mini developers. So he saw that there was a need and started teaching classes on ADUs right out of his backyard cottage, and has now passed over 70 students through the program. The Energy Trust of Oregon recently recognized the energy savings potential of accessory dwelling units, and they're now awarding full new home incentives for detached accessory dwelling units. So the benefit for these used to be around $200 per unit for above code measures. It now maxes out about $4,500. This is kind of a big deal for people building super efficient ADUs, and also for new construction where you're already building to above code. You can essentially get double the incentives on one lot. I've mentioned accessory dwelling units a number of times, so let's just take a minute so we're all on the same page here. These are units that are secondary and independent living units allowed on any single family lot in the metro area and many other areas around the state. The most notable exception is the city of Salem, who does not allow accessory dwelling units right now. They're called granny flats or mother-in-law suites. There's lots of names for them. And really the beauty of ADUs is that they provide a lot of flexibility over time. Our family needs change over time, so why can't our homes? And they've often been touted for their low material and energy use, affordability, and infill potential. The City of Portland recently recognized the development potential of accessory dwelling units, and in 2010 waived all system development charges for these units. That was a savings of about $10,000 to $12,000 per unit right now. And so the question is, has this waiver been effective? And the answer is yes. Prior to 2010, the City of Portland averaged about 20 accessory dwelling units per year. In 2010, after the waiver, there's 59 units built, 64 in 2011, and then over 100 units built in 2012. So, has it been successful? Yes, it absolutely has been. And I know there's work going on right now to try and extend that waiver and keep the trend going. So it's also interesting to look at the percent of new single-family construction that accessory dwelling units make up in the City of Portland. Again, in 2008 and prior years, it made up about 1 to 4% of all new single-family construction. But in 2012, it's making up 20% of the entire new single-family construction market. Now, I know that these numbers are tainted a little bit because they're really low housing starts. But still, 20% of the new housing market is definitely something to talk about and is noteworthy. And many people are talking about it, indeed. ADUs are helping builders expand their market. They're adding flexibility and potential income for homeowners. They're providing infill housing that matches with the neighborhood character. And they're doing it all using fewer materials and less energy. So ADUs really do represent a ton of untapped opportunity. Among the ADUs pictured here, there are some being built as rental investments that have a return on investment of anywhere between 5 and 8 years. They're pushing the envelope on energy efficiency and getting lots of incentives from the Energy Trust of Oregon. They're being added to infill new single-family construction and allowing buyers to enter neighborhoods that they may not have otherwise been able to afford because they can account for the rental potential of the ADU. They're being clustered around common space and forming these mini pocket neighborhoods. There's condominium overlays that are allowing ADUs to be sold off as individual units and individually owned. This is allowing affordable entry-level housing into neighborhoods that simply don't have affordable entry-level housing. And they're being affordably rented to friends and family for below market value rents in exchange for things like childcare and other services. And finally, I wanted to say that all the people living in these units are also really being challenged to live large with less. So I've been talking a lot about building small, but I'm going to leave the live large part up to our keynote speaker, Ross Chapin. Ross is an internationally acclaimed architect, land planner, and author from Whidbey Island, north of Seattle. 15 years ago, in response to the relentless sprawl across America, Ross co-founded a development company to demonstrate the viability of small houses in a community setting. He's developed 6 pocket neighborhoods, several of which have received national housing awards, and has designed dozens of neighborhood plans for developers across America. His work and ideas have been featured extensively in newspapers, magazines, and books. And Ross's book, Pocket Neighborhoods, Creating a Small-Scale Community in a Large-Scale World, which is available today, is a fantastic collection of his work and others that I'd highly recommend. I had the pleasure of seeing Ross speak on Wednesday night to the Hillsborough Planning Commission. His poise, compassion, and wealth of experience inspired much discussion among the commissioners and 60 or so citizens that were there. His work truly embodies build small, live large. And I hope you'll find his work as inspirational as I did. Please join me in welcoming Ross Chapin.
Thank you so much. This is a real pleasure being here. I'm honored to be part of this conversation. I am up on Whidbey Island, north of Seattle, and I am looking south to Portland and seeing that the dialogue around here, around small houses and progressive housing neighborhoods is peak. And I travel around the country and they talk about Portland and Seattle, the kind of things that are going on here, and look forward to us for leadership. So I encourage all of us today to step forward as we're coming out of the recession and show the world what can happen. So as we get into this, plug this in. As we get into this, I want to say that I've been asked to talk about the trends in housing and community as we emerge from the recession. And this has been the deepest recession since the Great Depression. And I've done quite a bit of reading on all of this. I'm probably up on it like you are. I'm not a demographer, I'm not a statistician, so I can't report from that level. But I do see that what we have ahead of us is pretty daunting as we're trying to emerge from this. There are multiple trends vying for dominance as we struggle to come out of this. The news media seems bent on the GDP, on growth, on consumer demand as being the measure of success. Growth is good, bigger is better, shop more, buy more, yay. At the same time, as we know, there's a countercurrent going on. Small is beautiful. Sustainability is the goal. Think globally, act locally. Now this banner is being carried by folks for whom local food, green building, walkability, and resilience are buzzwords. But these trends represent very different values, different approaches. Which will it be? Is it just a matter of a fashion show of this trend or that trend, or is it a political thing, the red and blue, we're all America, isn't this great? Now, this is a gathering that is looking, I think, at something deeper, more than trends. We're looking at something that I think is in larger proportion. Now, I took this question on about, I could present on pocket neighborhoods and small houses, but when asked to talk about trends, I took a pretty close look at it, and I struggled to try to understand what's going on. And the other day when I was out for a walk in our neighborhood, I met Robert Gilman. Does anybody know Robert Gilman here? Robert is a friend I've known for decades now, and he's got a big picture view. He was a PhD astrophysicist before directing his attention to the Earth and the emerging human culture. He's the director of the Context Institute, and for more than 3 decades he's written about all the aspects of the shifts of our culture. So when I was asking him about what he thought about the trends and multiple approaches in our culture, he said, well, back up a bit. Take a 10,000-year view. No, take a 50,000-year view. Let's see what's going on. And as we're walking in our neighborhood, he was trying to suggest that the changes that were happening at the turn of the hunter-gatherers, we merged to agriculture and cities, was major. And we have something even more major. And he described an S-curve. He said that the conflicting currents that we're experiencing are typical in biological systems. Now this type of curve occurs over and over. And I'd like to bring it in and frame our conversation around small houses in a much larger way. He says at the beginning of the curve, growth occurs at an increasing rate. Now this rate, the reason it turns over, let's see if this is working. No pointer here. I stopped it. Pull it out here, hang on. Trusty second one. So it occurs here, it goes through, and the reason why it turns over is that it hits an ecosystem carrying capacity. And before the curve, it's kind of like a clear cut. And in a clear cut, there are a lot of resources relative to the biomass, which is sun and soil, and growth is the imperative. That's what it's all about. Now these are opportunistic pioneer species whose job is to colonize big empty spaces, to fix nitrogen in the soil, to create shade, to preserve water. Think alder, think thistle. There's very little diversity. So pioneer species, they've got quite a job that they're involved in. So before the midpoint, there aren't many species around to take advantage of the resources that are available. And the game changes at the midpoint. So beyond that, in the final end would be a climax forest. And in the middle, there are moving toward shade-tolerant succession species as the dominant type. Now here, efficiency is imperative. The resources are thoroughly used and reused. There's lots of diversity, and many niches, and all interrelated in a web of mutual support. So there are success strategies. This is not a value of saying, oh, this is good, this is bad. Before the midpoint, you've got pioneer species which use a lot of resources, but the success strategies beyond the midpoint, you've got a low resource consumption. Energy and the resources are opposite as well. Growth rate, high and low. Longevity, you've got alders that just come up and they're really growing gangbusters. But they only last, 80 years? And then they're gone. And think about a cedar tree or a Douglas fir. Complexity is low. And in an older, beyond the midpoint ecosystem, it's very isolated versus cooperative. These are different approaches to success based on where we are in the curve. So I want to get back to us. And in 50,000 years, the human species have lived on the Earth abundant resources. About 5,000 to 10,000 years ago, things shifted as the human population began to increase. And in the last 100 years, we've increased by a factor of 4. This curve has gone basically vertical, and we're at the midpoint now. Up until now, we could count on pioneer species and approaches and strategies for that working well. But guess what? We're not in a period where these strategies are effective anymore. We need to shift our strategies to succeed. The challenge, though, is that we're human, and we've got a flywheel of culture. We think we're in pioneer times, but the reality has shifted beneath us. So we've got pioneer species, strategies, and succession strategies. So a quick outline of human history, and again, thanks for Robert for helping with this. About 10,000 years ago, we shifted from hunting and gathering to farming in cities. And now, we're in a period, when I say now, it's, maybe it started 400 or 500 years ago. And we're coming to, at this midpoint and beyond, where we must shift. Everything is going vertical, and we don't want it to crash. We want it to come and level out and find a way in which we can succeed. So that's why transition towns, that's why all the talk about resilience and sustainability, these are conversations around this very thing. So we're moving to a future where we are enlivening our part of being a human global Earth ecosystem. So why build large houses on big lots at the end of a long commute? It's just not making sense anymore. So I think we can move beyond this. So the title of this summit is called Build Small, Live Large. But what do we mean by small? So I'd like to start by suggesting some definitions. Sarah Susanka says it's about a third larger than you think you need, but costing the same. Now, while not a formal definition, a small house is what I would say a house that you fully occupy. It has a full complement of spaces and support to meet full-time needs. It's not an exact size. It doesn't have a size limit, but it's sized to meet your needs fully, with little extraneous space. I like to say it's low in fat and high in livability. Now, this could be 400 square feet, could be 2,400 square feet. A lot of the cottage housing ordinances that we've been working within limit the size to 1,000 square feet or 1,500 square feet for compact houses. So the size is relative. It relates to people's needs. You've got your tiny houses, which might be 200 square feet. That's small. But you've got a family of 4 or 5. That's not going to work. So a small house could be a single story, could be a full second story, or even a third story tower. Now, another word we hear a lot about is cottage. This is a low single story residence, and if they're upper floor rooms, they're tucked within the roof volume. It's simple and it's informal. Now, this shouldn't be confused with cottage style. It's got nothing to do with size or scale. Historically, a cottage is a summer house in the country, or perhaps beside a lake or the shore. Or it might be a caretaker's cottage near a main house at a farm or an estate. Now, a bungalow is similar to a cottage. It's got a broad porch and a veranda. Now, the name comes from a 17th century colonial India, meaning Bengal house, and that was moved into bungalow. The backyard cottage, which we have seen some great examples of, accessory dwelling unit, ADU. This is the second home on a lot. It's not saleable as an independent dwelling. It's an accessory to the main house. And a carriage house or a live-above is the living above the garage. I don't think I've seen many carriages these days, but that's what they're called. A laneway house, you go up into Canada, and backyard houses or alley houses are laneway houses. And these are small secondary residences or studios located off an access lane. Now, the tiny house is the poster child of the small house movement. It's gotten a lot of press over the last several years. This is a house that's typically under 200 square feet, meant for one person with a simple lifestyle, or it might be a second home, or a playhouse. Land is optional. Now, we're going to be having others talking about demographics, but I wanted to highlight a couple of things that I think are shifting the market. They'll drop into more detail, but what I want to say here is that what I've been reading and what I can perceive out there is that in the next 20 years or so, the housing market is going to depend upon the desires and the fortunes of 2 generations. You can see them. Baby boomers and the echo boomers, their children. The echo boomers were born between 1980 and 2000, and they're coming into the traditional house buying age directly in the face of higher fuel prices, high credit card debt, student loan debt, and a lack of high-paying jobs. These are adverse conditions that did not affect the baby boomers at that age. They've got an economic climate that's very different, and so they're putting off children, many of them. They're moving back home with their parents. This is the boomerang generation. They're doubling up on apartments. They're trying to make do with less and make it work. As a group, they're more diverse in terms of ethnicity and household structure. They're more tolerant of differences, and they have far less demand for privacy, and they're drawn toward living in walkable, urban, vibrant neighborhoods. Now, as we know, 80 million baby boomers who were born between 1946 and 1965 are entering retirement. Their lives have coincided with suburban sprawl, the ballooning of house size, and tremendous economic growth. This was all made possible because we were cashing in on cheap resources. It was the empire era in full swing. Now they're looking at options to aging in place. And their large, high-maintenance houses are isolated in the suburbs, and they're hanging on them like heavy bags. They're going to release an estimated 11 million houses in the next 10 years of these oversized houses. Whether these houses will fit the needs of the younger generation is an open question, however. They were built when energy was inexpensive, nuclear families were the rule, incomes were increasing for most Americans, and mortgages were easy to maintain. Now their children, the echo boomers, are and tolerant of differences. And they're going to try to make sense of this. And this is a challenge ahead of us. And I think that the small houses, the small house approach that we're really looking is part of an answer. But it's also where the houses are. The houses must be in a larger context. If we build a small house, out at the end of the suburban sprawl, we just blew our wad for the year for energy because we're tapped to the downtown employment areas, school areas, and we just wasted all the energy that we saved. So, here we are, this banner. I'd like to look at some strategies for living larger in a smaller house. And this I'm now putting on my designer hat. And I spent 15 years out of college. I must have a frugal gene in my bones because I've always been interested in this. I think small houses have the most life to them. They're the most challenging, the most fascinating to work with. And I've had such a good time playing with them. So for 15 years, that's what I did. I turned down actually a lot of high-end jobs because they didn't wake me up in the night. So I'd like to go through just a few series of how to make a small house live larger. Live informally. Forget the foyer, the formal living room, the formal dining room. Who needs them? Focus on making the family room the heart of the house. The eating alcove or the table or bench to use size saves quite a bit of space over a larger dining room. Making good use of space by looking at day beds and alcoves for not only quiet getaway spots, but for a place for, again, informal guests. Or it might be a grandchild who wants to come and they're going to love being up in this place. Or who wouldn't love being in a little alcove halfway up and halfway down the stairway? Now here's a spot that we widened the hallway and we made a little alcove with curtains on it. A wonderful spot for sitting during the day, but also a little day bed and guest bed. Sometimes larger is smaller. Here we made the hallway another foot wider, and we brought in a library of books. Here we increased the structure, the wall framing structure. Instead of having a hollow wall of 2x4s or 2x6s, we made it out of 4x12s, and we end up having a bookshelf. So we end up usable space in just a little bit more space. Now here's the problem. Small houses can be claustrophobic. What can be done about it? Well, borrow visual space. Raise the ceiling. Locate windows properly to enlarge the sense of space. Instead of having windows, if you take the proportion of the room and you put your windows on the long side, this room is going to feel narrower and smaller. If you put those same windows on the broad side, it's going to feel much bigger. You've got light on both sides, 2 or 3 sides of a room. It's going to reduce the glare. It's going to balance the light. It's going to feel larger. A lot of times people walk into the houses that we do and they say, how big is this house? And I say, just walk around it and come back and you can report in. And they never get it right because of some of these things. The windows in the corner increase the diagonal space. Bringing windows lower to the floor will help connect the connection to the ground, but also make it feel larger. And as well, you can bring windows up toward the ceiling and reflect the light off the ceiling. The more light there is, the more spacious it feels. Locating the windows at the end of a hallway will make a difference. And in a hallway that's dark, this is a bathroom that we put frosted glass in. There's still privacy, but it brings all kinds of light into that hallway. This is a house that we brought in. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a mirror here from a yoga studio that just happened to fit. This is I'll reveal something. This is our house. 856 square feet on the main level. And it's 2 bedrooms. We raised our family there. And 1 bath. And the yoga studio was shifting. They had an extra large mirror, and I said, I'll take it. It fit perfectly. And so we had a door here, and it looks like we've got French doors. And people walk in, and they think, did you do an addition? Yeah, we added a free mirror. Oh, here's one more thing. My home office is behind this spot right there. The proportion of this room was too long, and it just didn't feel right. And so I brought in my office, which is tucked behind here. I've got a view out the window. I've got things close by. I can hear what's going on, but I can focus as well. And then it made the room the right proportion. It felt much, much better, and yet spacious. Here we brought in an outside, I call this a flying roof. In the Northwest, where it's dark, we have a translucent my brain just went off. Polycarbonate roofing. And what a difference that makes. And here's the porch. Once we added this on our house, we increased the size of our usable space by about 50%. And we live 6 months out of the year on the porch, dining room. We actually moved the living room out of the porch because we could have chairs out on the lawn. And we moved our bed out there about the 15th of April. We just moved it back in before this last storm. It's great. Love tree houses. This is a rooftop terrace. Now, privacy is a much bigger issue in smaller houses, and so what can we do? I think it's really important to take close awareness of sound, physical separation between quiet and the active rooms, guest rooms in the main area. I think the acoustic separation between the wall construction, closets between bedrooms. I mean, these are pretty obvious. But in a small house, really pay attention, because what's going to destroy a small house for multiple people will be the sound that happens. So I'd like to shift here and show you what we worked with in Langley, Washington. This is where I lived for 30 years now. I can't believe it. Sometimes innovation takes root in unlikely places. This town is, even though it's 1,000 people, it's 5 miles from where they build the 747s at the Boeing plant. And so the pressure for sprawl is phenomenal. And in the early 90s, we were really taking a close look at that, and I was part of a team that helped create the cottage housing code. It acknowledged, we were watching the 1 or 2 person household proportions. And as Jordan said, it's about 60% of all. And yet that's not what was being built. And we thought that there was a market, so we took a code that was created for Seattle but never passed, and we took it in our town, and we were able to pass it. This is the first code of its kind in the country. I'm going to give you just an overview of the 3 highlights that it works with. It gives an incentive by allowing double the density in any residential zone. And if, it's 3 things. The houses are limited in size, they're oriented around a commons, and you've got parking that's shielded from the street. I can get into a lot more detail about the elements of the code, but this is the basic gist of it. And I had, as I mentioned, started out by working with designing small houses, working closely with builders, getting out there, building myself. Loved it. But as I travel around the country, and as I would travel back to my hometown in Minnesota and see how the sprawl was just wiping out many square miles all around Minneapolis and St. Paul, which I knew so well, but all around all the cities, I went, I know better. There's something that I know that I think I could contribute, and I can't just sit back in this wonderful little idyllic island and make these wonderful little houses. Aren't they so cute? It's certainly fun, but I have kind of wired that I've got to figure out if I know something, I've got to do something. So about this time, I was giving a talk on building better, smarter, smaller houses at the Northwest Eco Building Guild, and there I met Jim Souls. And Jim is a developer. He was originally a planner with the city of Marin and got started with a master's degree in that and wanted to move on the other side of the table. So he joined forces with a major developer in Southern California doing 3,000 and 4,000 houses a year, taking down the orange groves and just rolling them out. And learned all about the craft of development. It's a machine. And efficiency and growth is imperative. And then he said, enough of that, and he joined the Peace Corps, and he went off to Pakistan to help take part in the Afghan refugee program. He ended up being over there for 5 years working with Save the Children. And when he came back, he didn't move to Southern California, he went to Seattle. And he was taking part as being the director of the Threshold group doing affordable housing. When I met him, he had just finished creating 41 houses of affordable housing, and he was up to here with bureaucracy. He just really struggled with it. And then that's when he met me, and he was also watching Langley as it was working off and trying to create this code. So small houses in a town that wants to support small houses in a community setting. He said, hey, Ross, how about if we, create a community, do a project? And I said, sure, why not? And I borrowed more zeros than I'd ever seen before. And Jim, gathered his little coins, and we convinced the local bank, which I'd known quite well. It's a different climate then. We convinced them that the idea of building 8 houses on a, 8 houses around the commons, when the houses were 620 square feet on the main level, was a great idea. It's got a great market. It's got no comparables, and we're not sure if the people in the market have the money to buy it, but we're going to do it. What do you think? And the bank said, we believe in this. And not only that, but we're going to find an appraiser that can see its value as well. Because we had done our research and seeing what was around the country and the trends, but even though it hadn't been done, they took a risk with us. And by golly, it worked. So we had 4 lots, 2/3 of an acre. It's 2 blocks from town. This is 12 units to the acre. And we had a commons building at the center. I'm going to give you a little tour here. Yep. Sorry. The other way. So we're going to walk in from the street. You'll see a little opening here. There's a little bench, and a place to the right are all the mailboxes for the community. And as we pass through this threshold, we come into a courtyard, and the world changes. You see a commons building, storage to the right. We see from one side we've got cars, and we very carefully have the car, from the car door to the front door, you walk through a garden. And that's the gist of what this is all about, is that you walk through a common area and you have an opportunity to engage with others around you that you live. The parking is clustered in little pockets behind the houses. We've preserved the heirloom fruit trees that are there. Most of the site was overgrown blackberries, a jungle. These houses were cottages. They weren't small houses. These were single-story with living within the lofts. On the south side, we have windows, and we have an active yard. On the north side, we have no windows, but we've got skylights to bring light into the rooms, and you can see that the living room doesn't look into the next living room or the bedroom. We have living-sized porches. We have active rooms facing the commons. It's so lovely at night walking around. These are like lanterns around the commons. Very sweet. And the idea that the commons is you've got people looking on. This is the eyes on the street kind of thing, except that this is eyes on the courtyard, eyes on the commons. And if you or anybody were around walking into here, there might be one of the residents who can come out and, can I help you? Are you looking for somebody? Because the territory, there's a sense of ownership. And that's why it's a safe place. If you've got a young 2-year-old or 4-year-old who's out playing, you know as a parent that they're going to have other adults around, just other sets of eyes, being aware of them. It's a safe place to be. The bedrooms are farther back, or they might be above. Actually, not above. What we have up above primarily are studios and workspaces. Here's the Commons building. This is like a workshop in this regard. We've got south-facing windows which take shelves for seedlings in the early spring. It's kind of rough and tumble. There's a wood stove from a farmer that we found. We built a workbench great for fixing a light or even a bike. Birthday parties happen here, homework nights, card games, potlucks. And then up on the roof, there's a rooftop terrace. I love to build tree houses, and there's a barbecue up here and a sink. It's just a really fun place. You can be down in the courtyard, and it's very intimate. You walk up, and you can look out to the edges of town. It's very sweet. So the houses sold out quickly to single women, empty nesters. There's a young couple with a 3-year-old here. So when we built these, we did not pre-sell them. We kind of knew what we were doing, but we didn't. We wanted to be able to have the opportunity to work it out as we go and not have to deal with building for somebody. We trusted our hunches. Luckily, maybe more than luck, they sold out very quickly, and so we were confirmed. Our hunches were confirmed. But this is what happened within about 3 months or so. The story was picked up in the national press and television, and we were swamped with phone calls. This is just as email was coming in 1996, 97, and we're beginning to get email as well. And this gave me the sense that the pulse of the country said, we need this. This is a niche market. Remember, 60% of households are 1- and 2-person households. That's a super majority, and none of this is being built. At least then, I think a lot more now. So, if you're a developer, there's a pretty good market. And the houses we sold at that point for about $129,000 per house. And they don't resell very often because when people buy them, they hang on to them. But when they have resold, they've been for around $250,000. This is for about an 850 square foot house. So I'm going to go through just a couple of other projects. If we had longer, I could give you more detail. Session this afternoon, I've got a few more things. The Greenwood Avenue Cottages was done in a first-ring suburb of Seattle, and we had what was typical of a suburb, and even here. So after World War II, the lots got bigger, and the houses were ranch houses, ramblers, small houses, built in that era where they were building them fast. And so the kids who've grown up here have moved on. The kids of the owners of these 2 properties, there are 2 houses here in the front that they grew up in, and they had this huge backyard. And they had money on the table from developers saying, I'd like to have this. It's all built out, first-ring suburb. And so the idea was to bring in a cul-de-sac here with 4 garage-fronted large houses. And the owner of the land, the son who was there, said he found out about what we'd been doing and said, I don't quite feel good about that. What I like is what you're up to. Let's do it. Well, we had to work with the city of Shoreline to create the code to allow this to happen. It was a long way around, but we did it. We have the Commons building at the center. We've got garages. As you come in, you're facing, you can imagine driving in, you face the Commons. The garages are there, but they're kind of beside. You're not focusing on them. And then you come in, and there are the 8 houses. Now, when we sold, again, we built these, and only after they were done did we sell them. The first 3 buyers that week, we had a potluck celebration with champagne and celebrated. The next weekend, the buyers hosted a potluck for us, and then for the other people coming in. And now, 10 years later, here's their 10th anniversary potluck celebration. Every Saturday night, they've got a potluck. And so you can see who the buyers are. We've got a young couple with kids. We've got an empty nester. They moved out of a 3,000 square foot outer suburb house to move closer. We've got another empty nester group here, single woman. This woman here, for a while, was living her 20-something twins. Would move back home for about 3 months and then go off into the world, and then move back home and then go off. And so they're the boomerangers. And her mother was 83, I think, and instead of moving her to a nursing home, she took the bedroom on the main level. This is her house, and if you can believe it, the slope drops off. There's a lower bedroom in the back with a private yard, a bedroom here, and then a bedroom up above on the stairway. And so she lived up above, her mother lived in the bedroom, and the kids downstairs. 3 generations in 1,000 square feet. Half of the houses now have photovoltaics on the roof. Mike Nelson, who is the president of Solar Washington, came up to me after they were built. This is before any of the solar panels. And he was feigning just really being upset. He says, "Ross, damn it, look at this." And he came up to me and he showed me his electric bill. He says, "How am I going to justify photovoltaics on the roof with an electric bill like this?" It was like $12. But you know, he's an evangelist around solar, even in Washington, and he did it, and he convinced half of his neighbors to do the same thing. And this shows where the values are, because half the neighbors also have hybrid cars. These houses were in, I know, pioneer species. Well, these owners are pioneers in the beginning of a movement that I think is going to be huge. But they want to be able to have a place where they can walk their talk. So yes, we are taking a risk to build these. The people buying them were taking a risk as well. What's the value of these? Well, for them, the value was to walk their values, to live their values. And we've provided an opportunity for that to happen. And again, I think as developers, as builders, as architects, I think we can know that there are people out there in the general public that want these. Do them well. Do them high quality. Do them energy efficiently. Do them thoughtfully, neighborhood sensibly, and they're going to sell. We created, I just want a little comment here, we did all the landscaping in the common area, and we left every yard with fertile soil, ready to go, blank. Everybody, I think, not everybody, but there are polls that say 90% of people love to garden in some way or another. It might be a container garden. A small house provides land that's large enough to be satisfying, but small enough to not be a burden. And so we create an opportunity for people to garden, and every garden is different, and yet they fit in. This is the Commons building gets a lot of use. This was a late evening shot the other week at this anniversary setting. So we also tried to show that the idea of small houses around commons can apply to something larger. We were working with small 1 or 2 person households, and we thought, well, this could deal with families as well. And so we created a code, actually working with the city of Kirkland, and they have an innovative housing demonstration ordinance which says to developers and builders and architects, make up your own rules, make up your own zoning, and come to us, and we'll entertain it. It's a way for them to source the creativity in the community with people that are in the field. And so we put together a code which was similar to the cottage housing code, but had a couple of tiers of limits, 1,000 square feet and 1,500. And we moved in and we created, they allowed us to do this. And after it was done, they had a separate evaluation by an outside consultant to evaluate the work and interview the people. And now the work that we've done is the code for the rest of the city. So it allowed the cities to experiment with one unit without having to say, this is an experimental code, and we're going to allow it everywhere. No, this is a demonstration code, and we're going to try it out. And if it doesn't work, at least it doesn't work in just one place. If it does work, we can fine-tune it because this is a full-scale mock-up. The Commons building is on the right. And here you'll see from the Commons building looking off, and then from the end of the Commons looking off to the next cluster. There are two clustered courtyards. I'll talk in a little bit about the size. I think that the size of a pocket neighborhood is what I call this, should be maybe 6, 8, 10, perhaps 12 houses. Beyond that, begin to subdivide into another cluster. At the neighborhood meeting, there was a woman, Betty Lou, and she was in her 80s, lived in the neighborhood for 35 years, now is in a house that's far too large. And she was quite upset with what was happening with development all around town. And we said, well, we actually do small houses. And so I thought about Betty Lou when I designed this. This is about a 700 square foot house, single level, fully accessible. And then, unfortunately, Betty Lou didn't show up when we ended up to sell it, but there's a woman with MS that moved in. And she had friends that helped her create raised bed gardens. These are the larger houses, and they fit in quite well, I think. So after building several of these communities, Taunton Press, which had had put our work in lots of magazines, Sarah Susanka's books, Sarah finally told them, and they finally said that, accepted that small houses are wonderful, but out of context, it needs more. It needs community, and community is the next thing. So when you hear Sarah talking around the country now, she's not only talking about not so big houses, but not so big communities, pocket neighborhoods. So as I got into writing this expanded my horizon to see what was possible, and I realized that this is quite a universal typology. It's not for everyone or everywhere, but it's something that I think every community should consider. Here's the gist of it. I was at an event, a garden party, and there were 20 people at a table overlooking this gorgeous valley, and we all knew the host, but we didn't know each other as well. And the hostess said, say your name and a little bit about what you're about. And so it came around, and I'm Ross Chapin, and I'm just finishing a book on pocket neighborhoods. Next. No. What's a pocket neighborhood? And I struggled with what's a pocket neighborhood. How do I say it succinctly? I have a whole book on it, but how? What's the gist of it? And I looked down the table and I said, you know, before she gathered us together, there was a conversation at that end of the table, and there's a conversation at this end of the table, and a third conversation in the middle. These are pocket neighborhoods. When small groups of people come together around shared space, conversation is spontaneous. It's who we are. It's what we do. And so what do we do in our neighborhoods? We've got these stiff, formal houses with big garage doors, and the life of the house is turned backwards. And so we've got all this great life, everything's taken care of, and meanwhile, there's no conversation. The streets are empty. And so what we're trying to do here, the idea is we're trying to create the connections among nearby neighbors. It doesn't say, oh, we're going to be communal. You know, we're going to be, a hippie society. No. It means that we're going to be human. We're going to have places in which we can begin to engage. We can reclaim the streets as people streets, not as places that we just drive in with cars. And all it is a matter of turning the houses around, making opportunities for connection. So pocket neighborhoods, they can be the cottages around a garden, like we've done, but they're more than that. They might be a group of houses along a pedestrian street. They might be a series of existing houses where the neighbors take the backyard fences out and create a play area or a community garden or a barbecue cooking spot. Or like this place in Baltimore where we've got a very sketchy alley, and the residents were really upset, and they took back the alley and they made it into a commons with container gardens and places to hang out and sit. And so this is a pocket neighborhood just as fully as these cute cottages around a garden on an island north of Seattle. So pocket neighborhoods can be in urban areas, like this renovated market building in downtown Oakland, or this renovated factory. It also might be a suburban cluster or a rural cluster as a way to save land. This is, I think, about 16 houses on 20 acres. They saved 17 acres by clustering. So I want to list some design patterns for community. I think that it's important to name these things that we've been working with. The first one is clusters of a dozen. When we name them, they become more conscious. When they're conscious, they become part of a conversation, part of a language that we can communicate with others around us, and they're more likely to come into play. So when a cluster of a dozen, now this is a good question and it's relative. I had asked myself in all the time writing the book, I said, well, how big is a pocket neighborhood? Is it 6? Is it 8? Is it 12? Is it 20? Is it 50? Is it 150? Co-housing says, oh, you've got 30 families. Oh, the number must be 30. But when I looked at co-housing, I recognized that it happens in clusters of maybe 6 or 8 or 10, and another cluster. And they come together. This is a co-housing community in Denmark where you've got 2 clusters of 10 around an aggregate whole. And so the pocket neighborhood is difficult because you think, oh, neighborhood, that's 200 houses. No, neighborhood is neighborhood. It's bringing the neighbor back into the neighborhood. It's the nearby neighbors. It's the neighbors that you know. That's what's going on with the idea of clusters of a dozen. It might be clusters of 8 or clusters of 9, but dozen sounded pretty good. Shared common space, that's the heart of it. And this can happen in so many different areas. In Europe, they've got Wohners. And this is a place, as you can see, is a wonderful spot for kids. But cars can come in here as well. What's going on here? This was a takeoff on a cottage neighborhood using one of the cottage housing codes before it was understood by the people. And it's missing. It's missing layers. It's missing focus. So the common buildings and gardens are also important. Now, I don't think a building is, but I think a gathering space is. How many lawnmowers do you need in a neighborhood? How about having a common tool shed? The connection of these places to the surrounding street. Remember that street is a commons as well of another type. A street is a room. And so the houses can make a contribution to the street in many different ways. This is a commons building to the left. What happened here? There's no contribution. Corralling the car. Now I think the car, it doesn't have to be separated, although here we have a shared garage, and then behind the garage, you go right to the houses. I think they can be attached. Here we've done attached houses, and the alley becomes kind of a commons. You got mailboxes, it works well. If there's one pattern that's one of the most important ones, layers of personal space. What this says is between the more public area and the private area, there are several layers through here. The low hedge, the low fence, the yard, the frame of the porch itself, the door, the active areas of the house, and then farther back to the private areas. It's a hierarchy of personal space. Here we've got an antithesis that they tried, but they didn't frame it well. There's no layering, not enough. I think that room-sized porches are important, of course. This is nearby here, about an hour, 45 minutes away. Something's happening here. The porches are about 3.5 feet wide and 12 feet long and essentially unusable. The eyes in the commons. Nested houses. These are ways in which we can bring people closer together, and privacy is a matter of design, not distance. When the houses are slightly snug, that means you're going to be using the porches. And when the porches are going to be used, you've got a friendlier neighborhood. I'm going to finish this up by doing just a look at a few applications with site plans. So if you're a planner, great, you're going to have a good time. If you're have a hard time reading plans, just hold with us for just a couple of minutes. This is a project in Concord, Massachusetts, and I want to point out that we have traditional existing buildings here facing the street, and this becomes the pocket neighborhood in back. This is about 3 acres with a wild area going down to a river. There's a cluster. Now, I don't know the name of this. This is a plan that I saw yesterday. And if you can look at this, this is a homeless encampment. And these are called affinity circles. Here and here. These are pocket neighborhoods. Little clusters of tents, affinity circles. What to do with these oddball lots that are available? All the best ones are built on. This is an existing house, and we found a way to come in, create a cluster. And for those of you who are fire marshals, yes, we do have turnarounds, and we can get to everyone. It works. Here's a backyard neighborhood development where we have 1,200 square foot houses in front and a series of backyard cottages with a lane running between them. They also happen in urban areas. This is a setting in Riverside, California, a redevelopment area in urban Riverside. And we have 10 apartments where you come through a gate into a commons, they're private yards. These are 800 to 1,200 square foot apartments. And then out on the coast, not far from here, there's a developer who had done a 15-unit subdivision, built the roads, put in utilities, 2007, and said, I'm not sure if I want to build anything right now. Something's 2008. He stopped. He saw what we were done and said, what can you do? And I said, well, how about that? And so we have a cluster of 4, which is the first phase, which are just completed now. And then we've got other clusters here. Again, this is what we started with. We went from 15 to 23, so we greatly increased his value, and I think greatly increased his sense of community. And then here's the last one we're working on right now. This is coming this next week up in front of the Planning Commission in Ardmore, Oklahoma. We've got a large site that's about 4 blocks from the downtown area, and they are basically preserving all of this as this is the city giving away to the city for a park connected regional pathways. This is part of the wild open space for the community over here. Getting in closer, I want to look at a couple of things here in which we've got a variety of types. Here you'll see row houses. These are rentals around the commons, parking to the side. Here you'll see an entire block where you've got more standard sized houses. And coming in on an alley with a commons building. Here you'll see another group which opens down into the wild area. And if you live over here, single family houses, attached garages, barbecue area, that's the commons. And you can walk from here. Here's the public park, little covered shelter, a bus stop. This connects down through here and goes out to the larger park. So I want to just highlight the kind of things that can be done at a larger scale as well. These are also 1 lot, 2 lot, 4 lot little infill that works so well. It works wonderfully at 2 acres, at 4 acres. Here we have 20 acres. And I just want to say that it subdivides down into these sensible clusters, pocket neighborhoods. For more information on this, you can go to the website that we created that has quite a bit of this. And up here you'll see, you can go through and tour the whole site right there. So check that out, pocket-neighborhoods.net. And then also our website for the architecture company that we have, and there's lots of examples of projects there. I wish that I brought books for everybody, but I don't. I've got a couple dozen books in the back. There's information there. If we do run out, you can go to Powell's, your local bookstore. Please support them. Amazon has them for pretty darn cheap, or you could also contact us and buy them that way. I want to mention that partly because I put this together to get the information out. I think this is useful information that each of you can put together in your own way. So, thank you so much. This has been a great opportunity. I'm going to try to keep the time back.
Thank you, Ross. We just got a few minutes for some quick Q&A. Does anybody have a question? We can we'll take 3 questions here. Okay, just come to you.
What sort of parking ratios do you find are most successful with this when people are not using cars as much? Is there
Parking ratios, yes. Typically, the smaller households, it may not be 1 car per unit, but it's going to be more like 1.25. When you get to be a little bit larger, larger 1,500 square foot houses, some of those will have 2. So it's between 1 and 2 total. But here's one of the keys in which parking can be more effective. 1 spot is designated for every person, every household. The second spot is not tied up on your own lot. We're trying to solve parking at a neighborhood scale, which means that when the second spot is undesignated, when you're at a conference, your spot at home is not being tied up, and somebody else can use it. And so effectively, parking is far more efficient that way.
What to do with existing neighborhoods and, for example, the 11 million houses that you speculated would be abandoned by baby boomers?
I think there are great opportunities to do infill around existing houses, especially in walkable neighborhoods. I think there are houses that need to be upgraded. I think there are ways in which I did a development where we had 2 existing houses, and we were able to create a pocket neighborhood of 4 by bringing in smaller houses, creating a shared garden, layers of privacy, all of that. Ellen Dunham Jones is working with retrofitting suburbia. If you can look her up, Ellen Dunham Jones, and she is at Georgia Tech doing research on what do we do with suburbia. And they're identifying a number of factors coming in around transit centers, around environmental concerns, and so forth, and identifying places in suburbia where it should be re-energized and made into village centers. And when asked about, well, what do you do with all the other space that's sort of between these new village centers? And she said, don't give them any energy at all. Just let them. I don't know if that's the solution, but it's a question of our time. We probably, there's 11 million. We might have 8 million of big old houses at the end of these cul-de-sacs, at the end of nowhere. What do you do? I don't know.
So if
I'm not guiding this. Who's? You're back there. I'm sorry. Excuse me.
The examples you showed today were primarily of detached single-family houses. Why not gang the houses into duplexes or triplexes to increase energy
Terrific.
efficiency?
They don't have to be single-family houses. The fact that we've done them because we live on an island. We've worked in outer suburbs. We've worked in small towns. We are now, as architects, working in center cities and in other areas where we can do denser housing. And I hope within a year or 2 to have built examples. We've got lots of site plans now that we're working with multifamily ways. I think the pocket neighborhood idea absolutely can work. I think size is key, neighborhood is key. But style is not, whether it's contemporary, Tudor, doesn't matter.
In terms of ownership models for these sorts of neighborhoods with common space, how have you seen that pan out in terms of condominiums versus townhouses? How does that work?
So ownership can happen in a couple of different ways that I know of, maybe more. But they can be fee simple on small lots, and the shared ground is like a tract that's a common area that is managed by a homeowners association. We've also done them as condominiums. detached single-family houses, ownership is by condominium. So for a, let's say a 70-year-old single woman wanting to buy a house, she doesn't have to rely on trying to figure out how to clean the gutters, working with that. So that's taken care of by the large association. I think they can also work with a land trust model where the land is owned and we can get affordable housing possibilities that come in as well.
Great talk. So if you have houses fronting on, say, a Luna, where the houses come pretty close up to the street where there are cars, can you share with us some design ideas for how to take not a lot of common space, but make it feel communal?
So layers of personal space will be the key, and I think there's lots of great examples out there, but I think layering can happen in whatever space you have. And it might be raising a couple of steps up, or having a little pathway that goes. It might be being very careful about the windows and the window height and how it is. There's a science to this and there's an art to this. I have on my website a blog, and one of the blogs I have is called Great Good Porches. And I talk about that and more of that. I've also got it in the book. There's quite a bit on it as well. I'd be glad to talk with you further afterwards.
I think we should get moving on to the next session, but Ross, Chapin, thank you very much.